Good evening and Chag Sameach. It's Thursday, October 9th. I'm Ariel O'Sullivan, and this is IBA News broadcasting from Jerusalem. The Palestinian cabinet convened in Gaza today, marking the first time the joint government has met in the enclave since the formerly bitter Fatah and Hamas factions agreed to a unity government last May. It is also the first meeting of a unified Palestinian government in Gaza since the bloody internecine war between the two sides in 2007, when Hamas overthrew Fatah. Palestinian Prime Minister Rami Hamdallah and 12 ministers were escorted by heavy Fatah security forces during an inspection of the Gaza Police Guard honor. The two factions reached an agreement in Cairo last month for the unity government headed by PA President Mahmoud Abbas to take control of the Gaza Strip. Hamdallah today vowed to help with the reconstruction of the Gaza to repair damage caused during this summer's conflict with Israel and is due to visit destroyed neighborhoods during his time in the enclave. Addressing the media soon after his arrival, Hamdallah said that he came as the head of the government of national consensus to assume our responsibilities, and that the first and most important task for the Palestinian government is to unite Gaza and the West Bank with East Jerusalem as its capital. Hezbollah's bomb attack on the northern border that wounded 2 IDF soldiers patrolling the area on Tuesday was a message that the Lebanese group remained ready to confront Israel despite its heavy involvement in Syria's civil war. This was the word from Hezbollah deputy leader Sheikh Naim Qassam, who told Lebanese television that despite Hezbollah being very busy with the war in Syria and also on Lebanon's eastern front, our eyes are open and our resistance is ready to confront the Israeli enemy as well. The soldiers were wounded after a bomb was planted by Hezbollah fighters in the Sheba Hills. Israel responded with artillery fire. It was the first time that Hezbollah has claimed responsibility for an attack against the IDF since the Second Lebanon War in 2006. Following Tuesday's attack, Lebanese soldiers and UN peacekeepers increased patrols in the area. The U.S.-led coalition pounded positions of Islamic State in the Syrian border town of Kobani today in some of the most intensive strikes in the air campaign so far. But despite the airstrikes overnight and into the morning, the Islamic State fighters managed to capture a police station in the east of town. The Britain-based Syrian Observatory for Human Rights said the militants now control more than a third of the strategic border town, setting off fears that they may massacre Kurdish civilians. The fighting over Kobani has brought Syria's civil war yet again to Turkey's doorstep, and allies have tried to press Ankara to take a more robust role in the U.S.-led coalition to fight the Islamic State group. There has also been criticism that Turkey has stood by idly with tanks parked just across the frontier from the Syrian Kurdish town. Turkish Foreign Minister Mevlut Çavuşoğlu responded to the criticism by saying that it is unfair to expect Ankara to conduct a cross-border operation unilaterally to help save Kobani from being seized by Islamic State, and said that Turkey has already proposed a strategy of no-fly zone or a safe zone inside Syria. Speaking at a press conference with Çavuşoğlu, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg explained the situation.
I've, of course, heard and seen that there has been calls for a no-fly zone or a safe zone. It was also discussed in the meetings I had this morning with the foreign minister. I believe there is no simple and straightforward ways out of the problems we are seeing in Syria and around Kobani these days. It has not been on the table of any NATO discussions yet, and it's not an issue which is discussed in NATO. We'll always be ready to support Turkey in defending itself, because that's part of the alliance, and it's part of the collective security which the alliance is built on. We have close dialogue with Turkey. The situation is evolving, so I'm quite confident that Turkey feel that NATO is standing behind them, and that we are working together with Turkey to help Turkey defend itself against any threat.
In a joint press conference with British Foreign Secretary Philip Hammond, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry suggested that preventing the fall of Kobani to Islamic State fighters was not a strategic U.S. objective.
As horrific as it is to watch in real time what's happening in Kobani, it's also important to remember you have to step back and understand the strategic objective and where we have begun over the course of the last weeks. We're literally just coming out of the UN meeting at which we announced the coalition, literally have just been deploying the first efforts to liberate, as you know, a few weeks ago, Sinjar Mountain, the siege on Amerli, the Haditha Dam, the Mosul Dam, and we're very successful in those efforts. And notwithstanding the crisis in Kobani, the original targets of our efforts have been the command and control centers, the infrastructure. We're trying to deprive the ISIL of the overall ability to wage this, not just in Kobani, but throughout Syria and into Iraq.
We were asked by the Iraqi government to provide support in Iraq. We obtained parliamentary approval for that support, and we're already in action in Iraq. We absolutely have not ruled out playing a role in Syria. We will require further parliamentary approval if we decide that that is the right thing for us to do. But as Secretary Kerry said, this is a coalition. There are many players in it and many different tasks to be carried out. There's some division of labour here, specialisation of roles.
Meanwhile, U.S. President Barack Obama met with senior military officials at the Pentagon to discuss the mission to defeat Islamic State.
Our strikes continue alongside our partners. It remains a difficult mission. As I've indicated from the start, this is not something that is going to be solved overnight. The good news is that there is a broad-based consensus, not just in the region, but among nations of the world, that ISIL is a threat to world peace, security, and order, that their barbaric behavior has to be dealt with, and we're confident that we will be able to continue to make progress in partnership with the Iraqi government.
Satellite images taken of Iran's Parchin military compound after a blast reportedly tore through it show damage consistent with an attack at the site, which has been linked by Western intelligence to development of nuclear warheads. This, according to Israel Defense website, which says the images clearly refute the denial of the Iranian government and prove that the explosion took place. The images show Parchin before and after the blast and expose significant damage to the site, with a number of structures clearly destroyed. The UN nuclear watchdog appears to have failed in talks with Iran this week to substantively advance a long-stalled investigation into suspected atomic bomb research by the country. The International Atomic Energy Agency said in a brief statement after the talks of the past 2 days that discussions would continue, but it did not announce a date for the next round. Tehran denies Western allegations that it is seeking to develop the capability to produce nuclear weapons, saying its nuclear activities are aimed only at generating electricity. Western officials say Iran must improve cooperation with the IAEA if it wants to reach a broader diplomatic deal with the world powers to resolve the dispute and phase out crippling financial and other sanctions. Despite Netanyahu's continued warnings of nuclear Iran, there remains large gaps with the United States and other world powers on the issue. Veteran diplomat Yoram Ettinger explained to IBA's Margot Dudkevich what can be done.
We go back. Israeli Prime Minister, then Mr. Begin, who was the only one in the world alarmed by Iraq's nuclear reactor, Osirak. Mr. Begin was threatened by the U.S. then to refrain for any preemption. And once we destroyed the Iraqi nuclear reactor, we were punished by the U.S., punished by the entire world, condemned, military supplies were suspended, joint exercises were suspended, and only 10 years later, in 1991, the U.S. realized it was the Israeli action preemption in 1981 which spared the U.S. and the Western world a nuclear confrontation with Iraq. There is no doubt that currently the world is facing much more egregious type of threat, potential nuclear Iran. There is a gap between President Obama, who believes that the enemy of my enemy could be my friend on one hand, and Prime Minister Netanyahu, who believes that the enemy of my enemy could be just my enemy. and the miscalculated American policy towards Saddam Hussein in 1980 and then in 1990 allowed Saddam Hussein of Iraq, the enemy of my enemy Iran, who was perceived to be a friend of the US, to occupy Kuwait, and therefore triggered the first Gulf War, the second Gulf War, and possibly now the third Gulf War, with over $1 trillion damage to the American taxpayer. A similar miscalculation with Iran, misperceiving it to be as a potential ally, would cost the US in the world much more devastating damage than was caused by a similar policy back in the 1980s and 1980s. Therefore, it is well advised to President Obama and Western leaders to get rid of that gullible notion that Iran, the enemy of ISIS, is therefore potential ally of the US. Iran and ISIS are both enemies of the US, and to assume that Iran, which adheres to supremacist, radical, jihadist Islamic policy, one of the two major sponsors of Islamic terrorism in the world, which has intimate ties with all America's enemies and adversaries in the world, to assume that that Iran of the Ayatollahs and the mullahs could be anything but a sworn, deadly, non-compromising enemy of America could bring upon the U.S. major damages, both militarily as well as economically.
Israel does not have much to fear from PA President Mahmoud Abbas's submission of a draft resolution to the UN Security Council calling to set a November 2016 deadline for withdrawal to the pre-1967 lines. This is the opinion of Wall Street Journal columnist Amotza Sa'el, who also told IBA's Margo Dudkevich that Abbas's accusations of Israel committing genocide are particularly unhelpful.
I failed to find the rationale behind this move. My suspicion is that there is a loss of wit at play, and that raw emotions have somehow burst out, and in a manner that is extremely detrimental to the cause of peace, because it makes long-time Israeli peace supporters doubt that they actually have, in this particular Palestinian leadership, someone with whom to seriously strike a peace deal. What he was scratching in that rhetoric were the most raw Jewish nerves, the most raw Israeli nerves, and I don't see today the Israeli leader who, after this kind of rhetoric, even if it will be tomorrow morning Isaac Herzog, it will be very, very difficult to paper over this kind of rhetoric.
Now, if the resolution is passed by the Security Council, what will this mean for Israel?
I think that the diplomatic initiative as such is less potent than meets the eye. There are ways to wage this diplomatic battle if this indeed is Mahmoud Abbas's choice, which has yet to be established. Obviously, if he goes into that arena, then the minute this kind of war is touched off, he becomes not only an attacker, but also a defender. And there's plenty with which to attack him and his cause in ways that I believe many in his camp will regret, and sooner rather than later.
Okay, now with the indirect talks between Israel and Hamas in Cairo, do you think they'll lead to any agreement?
I think that there is right now a mutual interest, paradoxically, between Hamas and Israel, even more than there is between Israel and the PA, a mutual interest to see some kind of routine and reconstruction underway in Gaza. And that is why it certainly is, of course, also the Egyptian interest. And that is why I think that one way or another, this is what we'll be seeing in the immediate future, with Egyptian inspiration, perhaps also with Egyptian involvement directly. And the PA has maneuvered itself into a situation where it will very doubtfully be an actor in all this. It will be a spectator. This is my impression, while the actor down in the field will continue to be Hamas paradoxically. This is how both Netanyahu and Hamas's leadership prefer to see things unfold now in a way that marginalizes the PA.
But if Israel continues to reject demands for an airport and seaport, do you think we'll see the renewal of violence?
I prefer in such a question not to make forecasts because I think that we should be mentally prepared every minute for the unfortunate prospect of the renewal of violence. Having said that, I would say that, once again, all parties involved, the important parties, namely the Egyptians, Hamas, and Israel, do want to see some kind of an exit gate established somewhere around Gaza, with the most likely location being somewhere along the Egyptian Gazan border. And as for the venue, I think no one predicts or expects this exit gate at this point to be aerial. It certainly will be on the ground and will likely also be, one way or another, maritime, probably initially through El Arish, maybe in a more distant future in Rafah, which is exactly on the Egyptian-Gazan border, perhaps a seaport that would be half in Gaza, half in Egypt, and this way agreeable to all the parties and very useful for the people of Gaza.
The International Christian Embassy Jerusalem has been a long supporter of the State of Israel and will be hosting its annual week-long celebration on the Fast of Tabernacles in Jerusalem during Sukkot, bringing thousands of Christians from around the world in a demonstration of solidarity with Israel. IBA's Aaron Weiner asked ICEJ Media Director David Parsons if it has been more challenging to defend the country in the aftermath of this summer's Operation Protective Edge conflict with Gaza.
I think that there are millions of Christians in our movement around the world who are very motivated to help defend Israel, to try and compare it with some of the other recent rocket wars. We've had 4 rocket wars in the past 8 years. We had the one where the flotilla to Gaza and that whole incident. I think, you know, the commissions that the UN set up and started investigating war crimes in Israel, you've learned to sort of expect these things and to help Israel get through each of these crises, each of these conflicts, and then help defend them afterwards. There's a lot of motivation out there, but you have to have patience, endurance in this. The lies, the enemies of Israel are always out there getting creative, and we have to be diligent and vigilant in helping defend the state. And there's a lot of Christians out there who are doing this even now.
How concerned are you about the increasing boycott efforts against the State of Israel among the Christian community abroad?
We have been monitoring all the efforts to boycott Israel, the BDS movement, boycott, divestment, sanction. We've consulted with the Foreign Ministry, with the Manufacturers Association and others, and our assessment so far, there's not been a lot of real economic damage to Israel as a whole, but there are some companies that have been targeted and such. It may be impacting them. But we've taken a proactive stand on this, in that at our feast this year, we're going to be releasing what we think is the first of its kind, an Israel Buyer's Guide. It's a publication in cooperation with the Manufacturers Association of Israel that gives you products that are available globally on the international market. It will be an annual publication that we're going to be putting out, where Christians can proactively help support the state, buy Israel. We'll have an e-version that can be distributed to millions of Christians around the world. And the businesses that are taking part in this, they're getting very excited about reaching out to this vast evangelical Christian market, which isn't just in North America and Europe. It's also Latin America, Africa, and Asia. And it's very exciting to be working in this area in a positive way and not just reacting. I think there's a perception that the BDS movement and some of their antics and all, that it's gaining ground, but the actual impact has not been that big so far.
Well, turning to the weather, and as Israelis in many parts of the country went to the sukkah for the first night of holiday, it started to rain. Well, the forecast for tomorrow is for partly cloudy skies without any real change in temperatures. There's a slight chance of more showers in the various parts of the country and a chance of flash flooding in the south and eastern parts. Here's a look at the highs and lows for today and tomorrow. Aaron Viner will be at this desk tomorrow evening at our Friday broadcast time of 6 o'clock to bring you the latest news from Israel. Please join her. Till then, I'm Aryeh O'Sullivan, and on behalf of everyone here at IBA, we wish all our viewers a Chag Sameach and Shalom from Jerusalem.